Is pain and suffering inherently traumatizing? Or is it possible to prevent pain and suffering from being traumatizing? Stay tuned to find out. This is the Neuroscience Informed Christian Counseling Podcast, a continuing education podcast for Christian counselors. I'm your host, Josh Spurlock, and I am joined by the lovely Cassie Spurlock. Today's episode, we are looking at the NICC Treatment Protocol for Crisis Stabilization and Debriefing. We're going to dive into a little bit about how trauma works, but more about how do we prevent trauma and pain and suffering from becoming traumatic. Our sponsor for the Neuroscience Informed Christian Counseling podcast is My Counselor Online. You can check them out at mycounselor.online. So let's dive in. We're going to answer the question kind of right off the bat here, that pain and suffering, which are unavoidable in life, just, as Jesus said, in this life, there will be trouble, and doesn't have to be traumatic. That we use those terms kind of synonymously sometimes in our culture today as we become more trauma informed in a culture. We think, that anything that involves pain and suffering is traumatic. We talk about events as being traumatic. So we think about them like they're inherently traumatic. But trauma is actually about how something that is experienced is then stored within the nervous system, which means we're going to have an experience that has the potential to be traumatic, but it doesn't have to be traumatic, which is why you can have two people have the exact same experience and respond to it very differently. For one, it has a traumatic response. They have a traumatic response to the event, and another person has the same experience and it's a bad thing that happened in their life, but they don't have a traumatic response to it. So it begs the question, why is that? What is that about? What causes that? So as you spent some time just kind of diving in and just the initial piece of, pain, suffering, trauma, I'm curious, was that a surprising idea to you that pain and suffering didn't have to be traumatic? Or, in your just exposure and use of the language of trauma, kind of what did that strike you as?
Yeah, I brought my notes. I read through the protocol, brought my notes here, so I can reference them freely. I think you just hear the words trauma thrown around so often that it's kind of like, what actually is a trauma as opposed to just the pain and suffering of everyday life. And, even more so, like, can pain and suffering be avoided? No, I think that's like a piece that I just hearing you name just feels sad to me yet again. I hate that it can't just be avoided someday. Um, but that there is an opportunity for it to be, even in the notes you talked about it, just because it even happens doesn't mean it has to stay that way. It doesn't, even if it gets encoded in our nervous system as trauma, it doesn't have to stay as trauma. So that feels exciting. And I'm excited to talk through how we get to be a part of that with people.
Yeah, it's redemptive, right? It's not fatalistic that something bad happened in our life. We have an experience that's painful or involves suffering, and that automatically means we're going to be traumatized and have all of the negative things that can come along with trauma within our life. Like it doesn't have to be like that. And even if it does become traumatic for us, that's not the end of the story also, that there's hope and that there's redemption available. I think it's helpful, just to summarize, the what is trauma? What makes something traumatic? And most folks are listening to this, they're going to have a trauma-informed lens. This is a uh, assumes that there's some understanding about NICC and our framework and model for how the nervous system functions. But just briefly, what makes something traumatic is when we have an experience that overwhelms our nervous system. Does it dysregulates us to an extent that we're outside of our window of tolerance and we are unable to process and organize the experience that we're having. And so that experience then stores in the nervous system in a fragmented sort of way, and it doesn't timestamp like normal autobiographical memory timestamps. So it's stores in this forever present kind of way, and kind of creates all the symptoms of trauma that we notice. But we can have a painful experience. We can even experience suffering within life. And if we have the resources to regulate our nervous system and to make sense of or organize the experience that we're having, that experience doesn't store traumatically within our nervous system. And so when we think about crises intervention, we think about stabilization, working with folks, whether that's in a scenario where we've got a single meeting where we're meeting with the person and just doing an initial crisis stabilization, or if we have multiple sessions to work with somebody and it's just the front edge of that, we're thinking about how can we prevent this pain and suffering from becoming traumatic? Like, how do we intervene in a way that actually kind of like gets out ahead of it? And
Yeah,
that, yeah, which is kind of cool, right? That we actually have the capacity to do that.
it's kind of amazing. I'm thinking as you're talking, I'm like, I'm going to, I think this is maybe one of those topics that uh, you could just hear it over and over and you glean something new every time that you hear it. And I'm just thinking about, oh, I'm going to take that and put it in my pocket for myself about pain and suffering in my own life. Not only sometimes it's easy to look through the lens of how we can facilitate it for others, and it can be a little more challenging to help ourselves facilitate that for ourselves. So that makes me excited for all the pieces.
Yeah, definitely. As helpers, we tend to think of those that we're helping, first, but we're our people also, and we have the experience pain and suffering in our life that also doesn't have to become traumatic. So I think, what if it's not going to be traumatic, if pain and suffering isn't going to be traumatic, if somehow we can get out ahead of it, it begs the question, how do we do that? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And what all of us need in order for an event not to be traumatic is we need our nervous system to be regulated, and we need to be able to organize the experience that we're having. So I think it can be helpful to think about that in terms of working with young kids. We've got kiddos, and we've had the experience where kiddos are out playing and they hurt themselves in some way as little kids, right? And so they fall off a bike or out of a tree, or they scrape themselves up, playing in one way or another, and they are just a mess. They feel the pain of that. It's scary, and they don't know if they're going to be okay or not. Like, they don't know. They just are overwhelmed with the
Yeah.
experience that they're having, right?
Yeah.
And they naturally do what?
Run into mom and dad and seek help.
in our family, it's usually mom, and that they say, oh, "Mom," not that they can't come to me, but it's
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 you if I'm not here.
that's right. I'm like plan B for them to come to. But they come in and they are seeking comfort. Comfort being another word for regulation, that in their nervous system. They're
Yeah.
dysregulated and they're seeking regulation. And so a healthy parent scoops up the child and is soothing to them, come here, I got you, it's okay, talks to them in a soothing voice and communicates safety, that you're okay, you're safe, you're going to be okay, I've got you, it's all right. And then, right, and that helps that little body and nervous system feel safe and just bringing them into their window of tolerance, which then they're able then to bring the more of that front part of their brain online and maybe language their experience a little bit more, and we help them organize their experience through engaging them with questions, right? We're like, what happened, did you scrape your knee, and they're as they're trying to share the story of what took place, and you're reflecting back to them what it is you're hearing. Oh, you fell off your bike. Oh, actually,
Mm.
and scraped your knee here, but it looks like you're going to be okay. We'll get a band-aid, or give it a kiss, or whatever kind of medicinal intervention might be needed in
Right.
the area, right? But the language that we use around that helps the child make sense of what happened to them and the ongoing impact of that. Am I going to be okay? Am I going to live? Am I going to make it or not?
Yes.
And that combination of the regulating their nervous system and helping them organize it means that after the band-aid is applied or the kiss to the boo-boo happens, they're like, out of here and back to, yeah, deuces, I'm out. They're back to playing and doing their thing. There's no like it doesn't store in the memory. If they remember the event at all, they don't remember it as some terrible traumatic event. That it's just, I fell
Yeah.
off my bike, it's a thing that happened. Is it a bad thing that happened? Yeah, it's a bad thing that happened. That's what I want, but I'm fine and life goes on. And I've even maybe learned some things like I can survive bike accidents and it's not the end of the world. And I don't have to be afraid of the world. And there's this wisdom and learning that emerges. And that if I do get hurt, there's safe people that I can go to and be comforted. And, all of
Yeah.
these things emerge as wisdom on the other side of an experience. But if you contrast that with an experience where the same thing happens and no sooner, well, we'll say the same thing happens and there's just no one to go to.
Yeah. They're
Like,
just alone with the pain and the
right.
confusion and the stress of it
Yes.
all.
Yes. And they don't have the resources to regulate the nervous system or help them make sense of what happened. And that then becomes very scary and the pain is overwhelming and I don't know if I'm going to be okay or not, and I can't make sense of what it is I'm feeling. I'm just overwhelmed, and the nervous system, to protect from that overwhelm, kind of goes into a safety response mode that we language as being traumatic, a trauma response to it, and kind of moves
Yeah.
into action to preserve the self from being destroyed by that experience. Or if the little one comes in and someone's there, but before they like get a word out, the parents like, what are you doing? What happened? I told you not to. And or smacks the kid upside the head. And that instead of being met with regulation, they're met with
Yeah.
shame, they're met with intensity that's scary, impactful. They're,
Or like, you're fine. Just brush it off and go about your life.
yeah, dismissive of their experience, not comforting, not acknowledging. And it's that doesn't regulate the nervous system, and it doesn't help organize and make sense of the experience that's taking place. And so that event, even though physiologically may be pretty minor, emotionally
Yeah.
becomes traumatizing. That and
Yeah.
we have trauma that kind of forms the nervous system. So that's just kind of the basics, fundamental of how trauma works. And so, with that understanding, then we can approach stabilization and debriefing with that in mind and go, what does the person I'm setting with need from me? Well,
Yeah.
they need regulated in their nervous system, and then they need help organizing the experience they're having.
Makes sense. So, as we are talking about what a child needs, what a little person would need, and we just want to be able to offer that same space, that same regulation to our clients, how can we create this immediate sense of safety to bring them to stabilization as the starting point for everything we want to do with them?
Yeah. So, you know, similar to some of the ways that you would talk to a young kiddo that you're trying to comfort, you're using a lot of your nonverbal communication. Because when somebody's outside of their window of tolerance, the part of the brain that processes language, kind of think through things, kind of goes offline. And, and so there's the words matter less than the nonverbals do. And not that they don't matter at all, but the impaired capacity to process the words means that the other components, the nonverbal pieces of it, so like your tone of voice and your face and your body language and your posture, your pace of speech, all of those different things, your paraverbals, kind of all are really what help to establish that sense of safety kind of right off the bat and just with your presence. But then
Yeah.
there's like grounding stuff, talking about grounding techniques that, you know, the person is in a sympathetically activated state, right? They're in that fight or flight mode, or possibly a dorsal vagal shutdown where they're just overwhelmed and they're kind of completely shut down. Either way, they're outside of their window of tolerance, right? And are responding to that. And so they need to know that they're safe, and they need to be safe, and then they need to know that they're safe, because they can be safe and not know that
Yeah.
they're safe, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind
Yeah.
of like when
Because
you're
they're too detached with reality at that moment.
right, totally. So just like with a kiddo, you're like, you might say, "Oh, you're okay, baby. I got you. You're safe. You're all right." No, you're helping now coach the person to an awareness of their safety, right? Presumably, if they're standing with you in person or if you're working with them online, you have a sense that they are in a place of safety, right?
Yes.
But you want them to be able to consciously be aware of that, acknowledge that they're safe. And so you want to be able to, be like, are you in a safe place? Is the room that
Yeah.
is the space that you're in, is this a safe space? Like, have them look around, right? And then have them notice the chair that they're sitting in and the weight of their body in the chair and their feet on the ground and the firm ground underneath them. And these are basic grounding techniques for helping them be present in the moment and in their own body and in this place of safety and an awareness of safety. And help them slow down their breathing like that. Like having them look into your face and using your eyes and a gentle smile, look, kind of let them know you're safe and that it's okay. Patting the hand on the chest and just saying, "Hey, would you just breathe with me for a minute?" And just take a moment, take some deep breaths. Helping them slow down, helping them be aware that they are safe, help their nervous system shift into this ventral vagal state as opposed to the sympathetically activated state they're in, which as they shift into that ventral vagal state, their frontal cortex, left and right cortices kind of come online, and their ability to reflect, their ability to language and process language starts to come back online in greater capacity, which is what is needed in order to help them organize their experience. If they're not regulated, they can't organize their experience. And so you got to regulate first in order to be able to help them organize their experience. And so, you can see the shifts in their body and their body language and their countenance as they kind of settle back into themselves and that grounded. So you're
Kind of reminds me of I think of myself as a mom of littles, and when you got a baby that's crying and you're doing all the things, you're speaking to it gently, you're patting it, you're giving it space, and then you hear those little sloughing sighs. That's like that big deep shudder, and
Mhm.
then. And I imagine it's similar when you're looking for similar
Yeah,
things.
totally. And you're moment to moment tracking, you're kind of noticing what's happening somatically or with the person's body that helps cue you in that shift is taking place within them. Yeah. And then you're able to kind of move on to the next step. And these are really sequential in nature when you're doing stabilization work, is before you can do anything else, you got to get regulated. But once you've kind of gotten into a basic state of regulation inside of the window of tolerance, then you got to kind of figure out some other things. First things first, and then second things second, and the making sure that the person's like basic needs are covered, and that they have some
Yeah.
understanding around self-care, which this could be something that just takes a few minutes and depending on the situation, or it could be like the
Yeah.
rest of the time with them, right? Like you can't really move on past these things until you get them established.
So when you say basic needs or self-care things, like what kind of things are you talking about? What do you want to check over with the client, with the person you're helping?
Yeah, so you want to make sure that they have like ongoing physical safety, and so and shelter, food, where are you going to go when we're done meeting today? Do you have a safe place to sleep tonight? Do you have access to food, water, change of clothes? And who who will be there when you get home or after this meeting? Like, do other people know about your situation or what's going on, that they can check on you, they can be with you? And so there's basic, you know, needs for survival, right? Need to be covered. And so crises can take different forms, right? This could be natural disaster kind of crises, and they don't have a
Mm.
home to go back to. Like they don't have anything but the clothes that are on their back right now. There is food and water insecurity and of nature. And so you've got to work with the person to put together a plan as to how to address those things. And other kinds of crises, like when you're maybe dealing with loss of a loved one, dealing with a work crisis or a crisis in your church or ministry of that nature, it maybe doesn't threaten those things. And so, those are real quick. Yeah, I'm just here, my family, I'll go home, my spouse will be there, or, those boxes get checked, very quickly then, and you're able to kind of move on. But you can't assume that those things are taken care of. You really need to make sure that they are before you move on to the next things.
Yeah, it's like a hierarchy of prioritization. If you don't have the basic things, then there's no point to even leaning into the next things. I'm thinking about the preposterousness of trying to unfold trauma pieces with somebody that doesn't even know where they're going to sleep tonight.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But if we're not intentional about making sure those boxes, we can actually unintentionally overpass some of those things that are super basic and super important. Um, and so making sure that those pieces are covered, and then just looking into the, basic self-care kinds of things that in getting through a crisis, or when a person is in a state of survival mode or crises, that just brain can skip on some of the really basic things of taking care of themselves that makes everything else harder.
Yeah, it feels like uh, sometimes not only can the brain skip, but we can have a tendency to be like, that's not that important. Like, I will sacrifice sleep because I need to be doing these other things because I can't not do these other things. So, like, what are the important pieces of self care and how do we communicate to our clients? How do we convince them that it's for their good and that it's actually like the hierarchy of what they need in order to be able to lean into the challenge they're facing?
Yeah. So you really have to slow things down and kind of highlight them, underline them, put an exclamation point
Mm-hmm.
in the midst of all of the crises, which is so big and all consuming for them, that these other things seem insignificant or that they don't matter. But in fact, if we don't take care of the body and we don't engage these basic self-care, it amplifies the impact of what it is we're going through, and it robs us of the resources that we need in order to navigate the situation well. And so slowing down and go, listen, some of these things may sound super basic, but the basics are actually really important when you're going through a crisis like this. And so I need you to grab a pen and paper and write this down, what I'm about to say. And I need you to look at it every morning, then and breakfast, until we get through this thing. Because these things are going to sound basic, but they're easy to overlook and they make a big difference. So even in my setup and how I'm talking about it, like I'm like drawing attention, I'm amplifying the moment, and I'm building some anticipation around it. Like really pay attention to what I'm about to say.
I'm actually watching your body language. And for anybody watching us, rather than just listening to us, you're like leaning in, your arms are getting bigger. You're like making a big deal out of this with your posture because you're trying to establish how important it really is.
Right. Right. And so I'm going to say, you've got to make sure that you eat 3 meals a day, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? Good proteins, vegetables, fruits, lots of water. So your body has the nutrition it needs to process the challenges you're facing right now. Everything else will be harder if your body, including your brain, lacks the nutrition that it needs. So you got to do it.
They might taste like chalk, and that sucks right now, but
Yeah.
you gotta you gotta fuel your brain as an organ to allow
Yeah.
it to engage this.
Totally. It's like, I know you may be nauseous, and, depending, some people binge and eat when they're in a crisis and having stress hormones in their bodies, and other folks can't eat at all, like just
Yeah.
feel lose their appetite altogether, nauseous. And so they may not eat because they don't feel like eating, but you got to eat even when you don't feel like eating. And if you do feel like eating and binging, you got to make sure that you're eating, not just like bags of carbs and then, but that you actually eat some food that's going to provide nutrition to your body. And you're going to make sure you're getting some sleep, right? The brain, the body rejuvenates. You need 7 to 10 hours of sleep, particularly when you're going through a crisis. So you got to prioritize, putting yourself in a position to get that. And folks can have sleep disturbance and have difficulty sleeping. You got to say, listen, if you can't sleep, you got to look up online some articles. There's lots of hacks on how to improve sleeping and practice them. And if that doesn't work and you still can't sleep, you got to get in with the doctor and troubleshoot that, because this is going to be harder to get through if you're not sleeping. Like, it's not going to work. Your body needs the rest to be able to do that. And you got to be able to do basic exercise. There's a lot of, when you're going through crises, there's a lot of stress hormones in the body, cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. And that's great for surviving a bear attack, but it's not great for like navigating most of the problems that we face in life. And so doing just some mild exercise, like, we're not talking anything hardcore. It doesn't take hardcore in order to metabolize stress hormones out of the
Yeah.
body.
You don't have to do a HIIT routine in order to, or do a marathon training situation.
Yeah, this isn't hard 75 or, whatever. It's just, we're talking about like stretching and going for a 30-minute walk. Like that, that is a great start. And if you could do that 2-3 times a day, we do some stretching and go for, because in a crisis, you got stuff happening. It's triggering the stress hormone response in the body. You got more buildup in the course of the day. And so, you're in this continual process of metabolizing and washing the things out of your system. And so just kind of doing that 2 or 3 times a day would be really amazing and will help a lot. And then just take it easy as much as you can. Like, I know you got all these things going on, but rest when you can and where you can, and try to do some things that you actually find some joy in and can distract yourself for a little bit from craziness, particularly with other people. You've got to resist the urge to isolate and to disconnect, because we actually need one another to regulate. We need one another to grieve. We need one another to process through these things. So you got to lean into relationships, and then do some journaling, just some emotional self-care, where you sit down and you're taking inventory of what it is that you're experiencing and feeling and all the things that come with it, and you're processing it through your left hemisphere to language it and then write it out onto paper. And that processing in it helps to regulate your nervous system and helps you make sense of your experience, which helps you process through it. And it equips you to be able to share that with friends, family, counselors that you're working with that, are helping you with this. So all these things are pretty standard, basic self-care. None of them are super hard or complicated, but collectively they make a huge impact and just laying the foundation for stabilization and to begin working through the kind of grief process and grief work that's has to be done.
And what do you do if your client says, I just can't, I can't convince, I want to, but I cannot, I don't have it within me to engage, to eat, or to exercise, or to call somebody up or send a text. All I can do is lay in this bed.
Yeah. Sometimes folks are really overwhelmed and shut down. There's kind of that dorsal vagal shutdown, maybe moving into major depression. Typically, major depression requires, a length of time that a person is in that state. It's not diagnosed when you're in a crisis phase at the beginning. It's just adjustment disorder or other kinds of response to significant, impactful events in your life. But practically, what you got to do is you got to enlist help. Like, who can we bring in with us? Who loves you, right? Who in your life is a safe person who loves you that we can bring into the circle on these things, that you can share this list with, and who can be some accountability and encouragement with you around these things. Because if we can't do these things, we can't get through this. You're going to get stuck and it's going to be bad. Like, I'll use that language because I'm really wanting to drive the point home that this is necessary. It's not optional. And so if you can't move yourself to do these things, you're going to need outside support and help to do that. And I'm not going to be at your house around to be able to do this day in and day out. I will check in with you. Perhaps we have another meeting and we can talk about these things, but you need somebody in your life that can help you and assist you with these things.
And what if they don't have even one person?
And they're in a really hard spot. We have to get them plugged into some support resources, which you can't make people do. But that looks like they're plugging in with a local church. Recovery groups are helpful for these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And being able to plug in with a Celebrate Recovery or a kind of local church context where you can reach out and meet with a pastor, share the hard place you're in, ask if there's somebody in the church that can walk with you or help you as you're navigating the overwhelm of the season.
Yeah.
If these
You have
things
to
don't,
I was going to say, you have to take at least one step towards something that will help towards and all these pieces. Like, there's a lot of pieces, but in order to make progress and not get stuck, you have to take at least one step towards something.
Yeah. Otherwise, we end up with hospitalization, which sometimes happens, necessary. But in extreme cases where people just can't, they completely kind of shut down, then you end up in hospitalization kind of scenario where you have outside support, putting a feeding tube in you, kind of doing the things to sustain life and kind of get you through that. But hopefully it doesn't come to that, right? We were able to.
Right. I'm like, these are the sad parts. Let's move on to something more exciting.
It's necessary. That's what you do. But most of the time, that's not the case. That there's, you can, if they're in a good enough place to be with you in this moment and engaging you in this process, then they've got enough capacity to be able to engage the things that you're offering to them. And all you can do is try to drive home the point of their need to do that in order for it to take place.
Yeah.
So if we've got their safety in place, we've got their basic needs covered, we've got their self-care kind of plan in place and how they're going to take care of those things, we can move on to organizing their experience, right? Like, kind of helping them make sense of what it is that they have experienced.
And I imagine, because it is overwhelming, because they have been dysregulated, that they don't have language for their experience. They can't tell you necessarily, then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. Like, it's our job to come alongside them and help them have language and maybe like even feelings language for that experience. So how do we help them organize their experience?
It's definitely a collaborative process, right? That they don't, depending, again, crises is broad in terms of what it can mean. that there's a difference between natural disaster crises versus a unexpected life shift or event in one's work or family situation. So some of these things may seem extreme, and they may be extreme and not applicable to all people who are facing crises. But depending on how extreme it is and how dysregulating the experience was for the person, their sense of time, their sense of sequence of events, can be all scrambled, and they can kind of, in super extreme situations, people are just literally speechless, right? They're just like stunned and aren't able to process or find words at all. But in general, we can have a conversation with folks, and we can be able to just ask them to share with us kind of what happened. Right. Like, I know that seems really basic, but
Yeah.
we're just asking them, tell me what happened. What happened? Similar like you would, again, with that kiddo that runs into you, and you can see the scrape in their knee. You can kind of like piece together a little bit, maybe what's happening here, but you're asking the child, what happened, baby? What took place? And that invitation to, reflect on and find language and share and have that attuned listening other allows the helper to offer their nervous system to the other person and offer their capacities for language and to feel with them about what's going on, and the back and forth of them sharing and the reflection back to them of what the person is hearing, which the helper is reflecting back what they're hearing in a more organized way than they are receiving it
Yeah.
from the person.
Yeah.
So they're getting
Yeah.
mumbled, jumbled mess. They're giving back to
Mhm.
them a cohesive, coherent kind of structure for understanding it.
Yeah. I was thinking as I was reading through our NICC protocol on this, just how it's reflective listening. It's like a really intentional, organizational, in this case, reflective listening in order to help them uh just process. But I'm like, this is a thing that we've all been learning, and that we have all been practicing for a really long time, or at least told that we should be practicing for a really long time.
Yeah.
And even thinking about that with our kiddos, as you were talking, what happened, baby? I was just thinking, uh, in the reflective listening process, is this the time I'm imagining myself saying, okay, slow down, slow down, slow down. Take it one step at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's because this is what my therapist always says to me. Slow down. Can we just park there for a second? Let's
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And we're, you know, uh, we do things that work, and we get told to do things that work and don't necessarily know why they work. But
Mm,
the reason why that reflective listening and that is so critical in this is you are helping the person organize and make sense of their experience. They, begin handing you the jumbled mess, and you're
yeah.
helping it piece it together and use words to make sense of it. And you're accomplishing them feeling heard and understood, connected with you, them understanding themselves in ways that they didn't
Yeah.
understand before, understanding their experience in ways they didn't before. And so that back and forth of that, as well as, inviting them to check in with their own experience, not just what happened, but how's it impacting you? How do you feel about this? What's this happened within your church? What's the impact of that on you? And as you're navigating through this, how's it affecting your family? And so you're helping folks move
Mm-hmm.
beyond the facts of what, when, where, how, what took place and in what
Mm-hmm.
sequence, to the meaning making, what's the
Yeah.
significance of what happened to you. And so you're helping them then go that next layer in and language that and make sense of it. And then, yeah, just validating their experience, right? Because things feel jumbled and things feel like I'm not sure how to make sense of what it is I'm feeling or the sequence of events. But having somebody outside of you who's a mature, wise other who's hearing what's going on and hearing what it is you're feeling and the impact of it, and then validate that and be like, that makes sense. I can understand
Yes.
why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. Wow.
Even as
If I
I
were in
was,
your shoes, I think I would feel the same way. And this totally makes sense. It's just like, oh,
yeah,
I
that's what my
feel
nervous
crazy
system
maybe,
did
but
when I
maybe I'm
was
not crazy.
reading. Yes. So I was reading the NICC protocol and like the validating like examples that you were giving, like you were now. I felt my nervous system go, oh, I'm not crazy. I'm not alone with this. Others would feel the same way. I'm I'm not I'm not isolated in my feelings. This is a normal human experience
Yeah.
to feel
Yeah.
this way in response.
Yep. And we're using the noticing and naming core skills in NIC, both from the a facilitator who's noticing body language, noticing words, noticing ideas, meaning, and then languaging it back to them in reflection and having and drawing attention to different aspects of the person's experience. But then there's also an invitation to the person to reflect on their own experience and what it is they're noticing, what it is that they're feeling, and for them to language that for themselves, kind of back to the facilitator that's helping. And you're kind of co-creating a narrative to make sense of all of the different moving pieces that you're working together so that the person makes sense to themselves, both of what happened and how it's impacting them as they navigate through it, and kind of the work that needs to be done to move through it.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was interesting that you mentioned specifically grief, how
Mhm.
grief can come up as part of the noticing and the naming of things, and not just the grief of what happened exactly, but how that impacted the person
Yeah,
and the
there's
navigating of grief as part of that process.
yeah, there's tangible and intangible losses that are part of any sort of crises, from practical things like, you know, I don't know if my job is secure, or a loss of a loved one, a person is no longer there, to the intangible pieces of feeling safe in the world, or feeling like I understood how things work, or that I could trust somebody, and that I can't is a loss. That, and wondering who I can trust, that feeling all of those different tangible and intangible pieces as you're piecing the story together and recognizing and naming the impact of it. You're identifying the losses that are a part of this season and situation that the person is going through, which then equips us to do grief work, to actually not just notice and name the losses, which is the starting place, but then to follow the feelings and actually feel it through to completion, to process the emotion that's there, and then kind of figure out what to do with that. So there's all the grief work to be done. But there's also, depending on how much time you have and how, what comes forward in the session, in the meeting time, you've got um, previous trauma, and you've got wounded parts, and you've got defensive parts that are touched by the current crises and come forward, which creates opportunity to bring healing to those things. So not only can you process through the present crises in a way that prevents it from creating new trauma, the way it activates old trauma is creates opportunity for that old trauma to get healed and really for the person to emerge on the other side of the crises in a healthier, stronger place than they were before the crises, which is just one of those miracles that God works, that bringing beauty out of ashes, idea that he's able to turn a situation upside down, and what could destroy us or be destructive for us actually becomes a force for healing and transformation that improves our situation and helps us be healthier and stronger than we were before.
In a nutshell, that's like my favorite part of what we get
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super cool. And all of that gets kind of move into then identity, right? Because identity, our sense of self, how we understand ourselves, is an influenced by the learning and the growth and the healing that takes place. We can integrate those things into our sense of self. We can move into kind of the practical planning process where, okay, in light of what I have learned through my grief processing and all of this, what do I need to do? Are there people that I need to forgive? Are there boundaries that I need to set? Are there decisions about, my life and where I'm going to work or where I'm going to go to church or what people I'm going to have in my life? Decisions that need to be made that really we're not in a good place to make those decisions, even though we can feel a false sense of urgency to kind of answer all those questions and solve all those things. In fact, people oftentimes will come in and that's the first thing that they want to do. They're kind of in this
They're
survival
like,
flight
help
mode.
me know how to answer this question and make this decision
Yes. And they want you to kind of tell them what to do in the situation. And
today.
today, now, like, let's do this because I need to go make this decision and do this thing now, which is almost always a bad idea. Right? They're just not in a good place when you're in the midst of a crisis. Not good timing to make major life decisions. Slowing the process down, processing the grief, learning all the things that we need to learn kind of through the healing process, then really informs us and puts us in a good position to make some decisions and to think through what it is that we need to do next about some of these different things. And so it equips us to then take action. So it's not that we're not for taking action, we're just against taking premature action that makes things worse instead of better. That there's a process that leads us to a place of being able to make decisions and take action that is actually, productive and helpful. So yeah. So we're kind of wanting to kind of move folks along that journey.
We're not a fan of ready, fire, aim.
Yeah.
That's not the
Ready, fire,
strategy.
aim. Not a good strategy. Doesn't work out so great. Yeah. And well, I want to just encourage, folks that are listening or watching this, there may be questions that this training, what we're talking about, this subject kind of brings up for you. And you can submit those questions. We love to get your questions and kind of create other content and other training materials that speak to those questions. And so, follow the links, go to the website. There's web forms there that, give the ability to submit questions in future trainings, future episodes, then we'll speak to and answer those questions. So make sure that you do that. And, as we're nearing the end of our time, just want to say thanks to our sponsor. The Neuroscience Informed Christian Counseling podcast is sponsored by My Counselor Online, which is a leading provider in online faith-based mental health. And as a therapist, I have a therapist. Like doing my own work is critical to my being able to serve others well. So one of the best ways to learn neuroscience informed Christian counseling is to experience NICC as a client. And My Counselor Online is a great place for counselors to do that, to do their own work. The counselors at My Counselor Online are all employees of that practice. They're not independent contractors. They all complete a 2-year postgraduate residency in NICC, and they do their own therapy as well. The outcome data for My Counselor Online consistently shows a greater than 90% success rate, which is just amazing. So if you're looking to take for a place to do your own work or to refer clients, then you can trust My Counselor Online to be a place that will take great care of you and those that you would refer. And if you mention the Neuroscience Informed Christian Counseling podcast, you will receive a discount. So thanks to the folks at My Counselor Online. What do you think, Cassie? Covered a lot of ground today.
I think I'm leaving this time feeling excited about the opportunity to come alongside people in messy, hard, dysregulated situations and help them both navigate the current challenges in a way that doesn't make them store as trauma, and also to love on those parts that come up when they're facing this current day trauma and help them heal those younger parts so that they can live a more thriving life. That's just such a rich opportunity for them and for us to get to be part of.
That's what we live for, right? That's what gets us excited,
Yes.
that God's wired us to be a part of people's journey and to get a lot of joy from that. Well, thanks for joining us today. For more information about the NICC protocol around crisis stabilization debriefing, check out the supplemental materials provided in the article that accompanies this episode. And if you've gotten value out of our time together, please like and subscribe and maybe share with someone else who might benefit from it. And just want to thank you for being a part of our community, and we'll see you again soon.